Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar. We are excited to see you all here today. So if you are able to access the chat, you're welcome to pop a hello or where you're from in there. For questions, there will be a Q&A box accessible, so you can put great. Yeah, so you can put questions in the chat. You can put questions in the chat or you can put them in the Q&A box. Either way is fine. I will throughout be moderating the conversation in case there are questions that make sense to pop in the moment. We'll also have 10 minutes at the end for questions. I see folks are here and prompt and ready for this discussion. For those who might not be familiar with Bellwether or these dissemination webinars, we're a national nonprofit that works with a range of organizations, school districts, state education agencies, charter school networks, nonprofits, and more to help them solve challenges and create better educational experiences and opportunities for young people in the U.S. We publish reports and resources, and we have conversations like this to share what we and our partners are learning along the way. I already mentioned the logistical notes. If you're just coming in, you're welcome to pop questions in the chat, say hello, where you're from, maybe your name and title, and you can also access the Q&A box if you have questions. You're welcome to put them in as we go. My colleagues Zoe and Michelle are also here behind the scenes, and we will be able to pop questions in as they're relevant throughout. We'll also have the 10 minutes at the end of the conversation for more robust Q&A. So you all are here because you care about family engagement, and we're excited to have this conversation today. As you probably already know, family engagement can enhance educational outcomes. It can increase students' motivation and provide opportunities for parent leadership that supports students and the broader community. Over the last 2 years, the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools has partnered with Bellwether and other organizations on a grant to examine and disseminate innovative education practices. Throughout school site visits and interviews, we developed a policy brief as well as case studies and a toolkit highlighting promising practices on a range of topics, from supporting families of students with disabilities to maximizing instructional time. All of these resources are available on the National Alliance's website, and my colleague will put the link in the chat if you want to access that broader suite of tools. As we've started to share and have been sharing these resources over the past 3 years, educators have emphasized the need for more strategies to deepen family engagement. And so this webinar responds to that need, offering actionable strategies to support family engagement and to help schools foster deeper collaboration with families and communities. So today I'll be moderating the conversation with my colleague, Christy Wolfe. Christy is the Senior Vice President for Policy and Research and Planning for the National Alliance for Public and Charter Schools. It's a nonprofit whose mission is to lead public education to unprecedented levels of academic achievement by fostering a strong charter school movement. The National Alliance's vision is that every child can choose a well-funded, high-performing public school that delivers an excellent education for their children. Christy has more than 20 years of experience working on federal education policy and has been a strong advocate of charter schools. In 1998 for a U.S. House of, ever since her first visit to a charter school in 1998. For a U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Education and Workforce Field hearing. And with that, I will pass it over to Christy to share a little bit more about the project and to introduce our panelists for this discussion.
Thanks so much, Titilayo. It's great to be with you all here this afternoon. At the National Alliance, we have this grant for a couple of reasons. One of the things that we do at the National Alliance is advocate on behalf of charter schools, but at the federal level, we particularly advocate on behalf of the Charter Schools Program Grant. And that grant is responsible for providing startup funds to charter schools up to $2 million, generally speaking, to cover the startup costs. And today, about half of charter schools are open because of that grant. Well, another part of that grant is called the Dissemination Grant, the National Dissemination Grant. And 3 years ago, the National Alliance competed and received a grant to disseminate in the post-COVID environment in particular, but more broadly, what are the innovative ways that charter schools are really leveraging their autonomy to address the most pressing needs? And a lot of these are stemming from COVID era, or whatever era you want to call it now, learning loss that seems to be sadly entrenched and with us based on the latest NAEP scores, but also working with their teachers, serving special populations. And then this particular webinar, just like Titilayo said, is really the fruit of hearing from folks who want to do more on family engagement. And so this and a couple of other projects that we're kicking off in the last year of grant are really going to take a closer look at how schools can partner with students with the ultimate goal of achieving better student outcomes, right? So everyone can feel great, but if that's not the end goal, then things are off course. So we really look forward to hearing from our panelists today, and I will go ahead and introduce them. I think we put the link in the chat to where to reach the resources. And then at the end, there will be an opportunity to indicate whether or not you would like to be part of, and there's no commitment, no dotted line, but if you want to receive additional or be part of additional technical assistance opportunities related to these topics. But let's get to our panel who have the real experience on the ground. I'm going to start with Cassandra McGraw is with us. She's the National Director of Education Strategy and Innovation at the National Center for Families Learning. And there she spearheads their programmatic offerings, which includes program design, immersive technologies, and other priorities. And she oversees and supports family literacy, family engagement, family leadership, professional learning teams, and also comes with a background in the classroom and educational administration. So she brings all these experiences together to help advocate for support for students and families who are furthest from opportunity. So thank you very much for being with us today. Ayesha Doster is the principal of Rocketship Discovery Prep in San Jose, California. And she's born and raised on the East Coast in Miami, Florida. So you're going you went the direction that everyone else is, against the direction that everyone else is going these days, it seems like. And she spent the last 12 years in education, first as a teacher, and then as an assistant principal. And in all those places, she's just become known as someone where students and leaders are benefiting from her passion and expertise in closing the achievement gap. And then she came to Rocketship in 2021. But before that, she was in New York City and Dubai, where she also served as a teacher and a school leader. Lastly, but not least, Dr. Handley is the Assistant Superintendent of Multilingual Learners in Jefferson County Public Schools, Kentucky. And prior to this, she was an award-winning principal at Kenwood Elementary. During her 16-year tenure as principal, she's led her schools to be recognized for in many different ways, including the National School of Character, a National Distinguished ESEA school, and the first family-friendly certified school in the state of Kentucky. Ooh. I froze there. Sorry. Am I back? How much did you lose? Sorry.
You're back. We heard everything.
Okay, great. Well, before, while the Wi-Fi is still working, let's keep going here. So we're just going to take some time here to talk among the panel and answer some questions. So let's start by hearing a bit about why schools and districts should prioritize family engagement. And Cassandra, would love to hear from you about why it should be prioritized. Yeah, especially when schools are re-examining their budgets and maybe thinking this is something that could go on the chopping block.
Thanks, Christy. Thank you all so much for having us join this really important conversation. To jump right in, I would say it's really important to recognize that investing in family engagement specifically shouldn't be seen as an extra expense, but really a necessary investment of both time and resources. We know that the research has shown that it's a proven strategy for improving student learning outcomes. And specifically, districts that commit to meaningful family engagement are seeing real benefits, right? Including improved student attendance, academic outcomes that I'll share more about a little bit later today. But I'll also add that family engagement is sometimes understood to be an outcome. So it's often perceived to be an unnecessary expense, since many schools really do have some method of communicating with families and or offering resources. However, that deep transformative family engagement that we're talking about here this afternoon is really about building a system of fostering authentic and meaningful partnerships and relationships with families, with the objective of improving student learning outcomes. So it's important to name that it is a strategy that we use. And so ultimately, the research tells us, and from the results we've seen across the country, that when families are engaged, or when families are engaged, students thrive, both developmentally, academically, socially. And so that's really why schools should view family engagement as not just a budget line to cut, but a critical investment in student success.
Sorry about that. I was just saying, I appreciate what you say there about it being a strategy and not an outcome in and of itself. Like it's a way to get to those student outcomes. So Dr. Handley and Ayesha, well, starting with you, Dr. Handley, as a district leader, can you talk about how Jefferson County is approaching family engagement, particularly for families with multilingual learners? How, if all, has the district's approach changed in the last few years?
Absolutely. And I echo what Cassandra said about thank you for having us here. This is probably one of our most passionate topics, and I get the opportunity to work at the district level with this. So in a larger urban district like Jefferson County, we have almost 100,000 students. It's really important, I think, no matter how small or how large your district is, to take a very multifaceted approach, because the reality is that identifying that there are some things that all families need to know and be able to do. And then there are specific needs to specific families. And sometimes those needs are very specific to a school base. So let me give an example. Perhaps a particular school has a lot of families where it's grandparents raising their grandchildren. And so there are things that they want all of their families to know, but if a grandparent's raising a grandchild and there's some generational gaps about how things used to be, then those are additional information and support that school may need, with ways to do outreach and engaging in that two-way partnership. So as it relates, so that's just a first thing that I want to say, just to level set, is just it is a very multifaceted approach. The other thing I will say is that particularly when working with our multilingual families, which in Jefferson County, we have about 21,000 identified multilingual learners. And then that number doesn't include our students who are initially proficient or who have exited the services. So we're probably about 1 in 4 of our students are a multilingual learner, which makes our district so beautifully diverse. But I think it goes down to thinking about, okay, if these are the things that we want all of our families to know and have access to, what barriers currently exist around communication for our multilingual families? And then start to, one, identify those barriers, and then start to put measures in place to be able to remove some of those barriers. And then so some of the ways that we've done that in Jefferson County is, the first piece is just making sure that families have access to interpretation services. So that could be on demand, by phone, by video, or in person. And so we partner in Jefferson County with Language Line Solutions. I'm gonna do a quick shameless plug. Our district was recently awarded the Client of the Year with Language Line Solution, and we were the only government agency to have ever been awarded that recognition because of the work that we're doing to remove those communication barriers for families. And so if you're not familiar with Language Line Solutions, essentially that is just a vendor that provides access to on-demand interpretation, video or by phone. And so what that does is that really allows all of our schools to be what we call multilingual. No longer should a multilingual or an international family come to a school and hear the term, "We're sorry, no one speaks your language here. You need to go somewhere else." We know that first experience with families needs to be a positive one. Cassandra talked about relationships. That's where it's at, building that trust. And if your first encounter is, "Sorry, we're saying something that makes you feel like you don't belong here," it's hard to undo that bad first experience. And so we want to equip all of our schools with having the resources that they need to be able to remove their communication barriers. And so that's just one example. What we've done in our office, the Office of Multilingual Learners, is we have purchased iPad on a stand, which sounds very basic, but there's an app. So with Language Line Solutions, you can use phone, you can use computer. There's a code you have to dial, and it's a great service. But sometimes we know that when things are hard or new, we don't want to use them. So we were looking to even remove barriers for our staff, how to make it the easiest for our staff to access to our families. So there's an iPad in every one of our front offices to where a family will come in. There's kind of a script of point to the language, and then we can tap a little icon, and then suddenly the interpretation services are there. So that's certainly one way. And then, of course, there's translation as well. So when we're sending documents home, are we ensuring that we are considering what languages are spoken? Now, in our district, we have over 150 different languages. So while we can't necessarily send it out in every single language, what we do is we try to prioritize our top 5 to 6 languages and really start to build an infrastructure. And that's one of the changes that we've made over the time, is that it used to be the communication went out and it was like, oh yeah, needs to go out in Spanish too. So we've really been working hard to create an infrastructure so that when district offices, school offices are planning a way to communicate with their families, they're thinking about that translation on the front end. And so that's just a natural embedded part of what they're doing. When getting official documents translated, we work with the vendor to get that. So that might be an IEP for a special education meeting, or let's say a district handbook. But we also know that there are times when immediate communication needs to go out. And so in cases like that, we've kind of toggled with some different opportunities over the year, but this year we started using the Lexmark Translation Assistant. It's a new technological device that really kind of rivals anything that we've done. We've often relied on Google Translate, which is still an option, but what we found with this is one of the best machine translation options that we've had. And I think the benefits of this that allows it to, the Lexmark Translation Assistant, is that it goes above and beyond. No longer are we just, yes, it does one-way communication. So if I have my newsletter and it's in English, I can feed it through or upload it to a portal, say I want it in Arabic, Spanish, Kinyarwanda, and Swahili. It translates and we can get that out. But the really powerful piece, because remember, a goal is two-way communication, is that oftentimes with families, if they don't have English proficiency, they're real hesitant to communicate with us. So now this allows families, if they're proficient in their native language, to send in information in their native language. This particular device will then translate it to English. So that's removing barriers for families to be able to communicate. Just a few other things. We've invested in Pocket Talks, which are kind of like a handheld translation assistant that we use. Our bus driver started using that for parents at the bus stop, and the child's not on the bus or they have a concern. Now we are removing those barriers. In the state of Kentucky, bus drivers can't use their phones, so we were looking for another device of being able to do that. And then I would say that 2 other things that we do, and then I'll turn this over because I know Ayesha has a lot of great ideas that she's doing as well. But so those are all great, and those are what I would call like surface level of removing barriers. But what we're recognizing is that many of our multilingual families, for some, there's no written language. So sending something home in writing, whether there's a written language or not, is making an assumption that our families are literate. Okay, so recognizing that, we have to remove that assumption. So what we've recognized is going to the community where they are. So we know that our families are intimately connected with our community partners. They come and they have their own community that they already trust. So instead of asking families to conform and come to us, let's go to the community. So we meet monthly with our community partners and kind of share information with them, and using them as a cultural broker between the school system and the community to really build those bridges. And then finally, the thing that I'm probably most proud of this year that we've instituted is something called Family University. In just a moment, I'll drop a link in the chat to the video about it. But we are recognizing that piece. We're actually going into, we have a particular housing complex where we have a lot of Kinyarwanda speakers. And so we set up a 6-week series to where we're going in there with interpreters and saying, like, here we are, let's talk about this, and hearing their needs, and then helping them remove some of that fear about what a U.S. school might encompass. So I know that was a long answer, but just really passionate about a lot of the things that we have going on in Jefferson County.
Thank you so much. Ayesha, why don't you talk about what you all are doing about family engagement at Rocketship?
Absolutely. So similar to Dr. Handley, and all of her work with multilingual families, I actually run an elementary school, a Title I elementary school in San Jose, which I think is like arguably one of the wealthiest cities in the world, if not the world, then definitely our country. And however, though, 82% of my families are considered low-income families. A vast majority of them are Hispanic immigrants. So when I think about like what we're doing for family engagement and how we specifically engage those families, I think about what's been at the core of Rocketship's model since day one, 18 years ago, before I was even thought of, right? It's bigger than me. I think about the pillar that is parent power for Rocketship, right? So shameless plug, similar to Dr. Handley, a shameless plug for Rocketship Public Schools. But I think about their pillar for parent power and parent partnership, and how, if I'm going to work for this organization, how do I bring that to life on my campus at Rocketship Discovery Prep? And I think it starts with my belief, and what do I believe about our families and how we engage them? And my belief specifically is that parents are their baby's first teacher, period. And if that's my belief, right, that then has to be my staff's belief, right? So I have a duty to ensure that they can see my vision, but more than see my vision out, right? Carry my vision out. And if I believe that parents are that Rocketeer's first teacher, then that brings about a true partnership, right? We have to engage our parents by making sure that they feel like true partners in their baby's education. And that starts before they even walk through our school doors. Right. So in the summer, my teachers are required to do home visits. So they actually go into the homes of the babies that will be in their classrooms, and they get to know their families. They get to know their babies, their aspirations for their students. They get to know their interests, right? So that way, when students are actually like walking into the doors, whether they're crying, whether they're happy, right? Parents know that they have a teacher that loves them and cares for them, right? And right away, you've bought in that family and invested that family, right? So home visits are one way that we boost family engagement, but we also have things like our parent-teacher conferences, which are 3 times a year, right? Where families actually get to hear about their students' progress over the year, how they're doing. We also have something called cafecitos every month. So that's essentially just a parent coffee where parents actually get FaceTime with me. So every month we sit and we talk about the things that are going on in our building. We engage our families. We ask them, what do they want to see going on in our building? What events do they want to see put on? Right? We talk about our data, like how our students are doing by grade level, by classroom, right? All of these things that parents are interested in. And if they're not interested in, they get very interested in it because this is what we're putting it in their face, right? We're showing them, this is how we're doing, right? What do you think, right? We're investing them. And that buy-in is important. We also have something called Los Dichos, right? Which is essentially a parent-led in-classroom reading program every month. So every month, our families actually get to come into their baby's classroom and they get to read to them, right? And our kids love it. Our kids are bought into it. And because our kids are bought into it, they buy in their families, right? We make competitions. We're like, whoever has the highest family turnout, you all get a snack party. You all get extra recess, right? So simple things like that to buy in our students, but also our families, right? If they have their babies like knocking on that door every single day, like mommy, daddy, auntie, uncle, whoever they live with, come to Los Dichos, right? Then we get a higher turnout. And we actually, in our network, we have 23 schools, and my school specifically has always had the highest turnout every single month for family engagement and families coming out. So super excited and super proud about that, right? So again, just giving parents, I think, opportunities to actually be engaged, I think is key. I think one of the ways that we've had to shift our approach or change our approach over the years, just given the pandemic, given the political climate, right? We've had to be flexible. And I think it's hard. It's hard sometimes to see what a parent needs and actually like give it to them, especially when it goes outside of your model. Like essentially, we want our parents in our doors, right? Coming in, participating in the classrooms, but we have to accommodate for where we are, right? We have to accommodate for the times. And I think over the years, we've had to shift a lot of things that we believe to be core, which is families being in the building. So I talked about parent coffees or cafecitos a little bit earlier. And one of the things that we've changed is being flexible in the times that we offer cafecitos. So instead of one in-person meeting, now we make sure that we have 2 meetings, right? The same information is delivered. One is in the morning in person. So we still have that in-person aspect where families get to come into our school building. It's right after launch. And for us, launch is simply a time for our community. So our whole school community to come together and we dance, we sing, we celebrate students who have met their goals. A lot of our families actually join us for launch. So that's a key time to bring our families in. So we're like right after lunch at 8 o'clock, come on in, you come on in, postulate, right? Like come in, right? Come into our building. We're gonna have parent coffee or parent cafecito, and we're gonna tell you the updates or the things that's going on at Rocketship Discovery Prep. For those families that we don't get right after launch, right, we do have an evening meeting that is via Zoom, right? So on Zoom, typically when parents are getting off, when they have an opportunity to join, right, from 5 to 6 p.m., right, thinking about those times and being intentional around the times we offer it has also helped us to keep high family engagement. And it's something that our families have actually appreciated. We've actually surveyed them and said, like, hey, what time would you want cafecito to be? And that has done wonders for our numbers. So it's amazing what you can do when you ask families what they need and then you like provide it.
I'm seeing a lot of love in the chat for all the strategies that you all just laid out there, and I'm sure we'll folks are willing to discuss that more during our Q&A. But Cassandra, back to you. What are some trends that you're seeing nationally from where you sit, and in terms of family engagement, and what's working really well?
Yeah, I love having an opportunity to highlight all the really great work that's coming out across the country, specifically in state level efforts. So I'll start by highlighting our work that's occurring really in leading the statewide family engagement centers in North Carolina, Colorado, Nebraska. NCFL is also supporting Washington Statewide Family Engagement Center and also across our partner districts in Kentucky, like Jefferson County and Fayette County. NCFL is really seeing districts across the country deepen their commitment to building integrated and sustained partnerships with families. And I just want to put in a shameless plug that if you have not already seen the dual capacity framework, that will be a really great resource to use, whether you are new to the family engagement space or you're building it out, because it really does provide a roadmap for how to get to effective shared partnership with families, but also shared leadership. But I would also name that nationally, we've really learned that we have to move beyond quick fixes, right? Like one-off trainings or strategies that don't actually work to build relationships with families. We know that true family engagement really requires changing how educators and families work together. So I really appreciate Ayesha's examples. I also really appreciate your shout out to home visits, because that's a really great relationship building strategy that I've seen work really well in different states. But we're seeing a prioritization of meaningful relationships, academic partnerships like student-led conferencing, also making sure that there's established ongoing communication throughout the school year, and really building a sustained practice of co-designing solutions with families for students. That's really the core of the work of family engagement. And as one educator put it in Fayette County, family engagement is at the forefront of everything we do now. So that shift really happens when districts and schools make engagement a priority. They align it with their strategic goals. They're equipping educators with the tools to build those genuine partnerships with families. And then the last thing that I'll share specifically, we've seen districts using funds like ESSER funds, for example, that elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund, to really build the infrastructure at the district level first, and then see that integrated across the schools. And so through those efforts, we've seen districts creating stronger guidance for schools, along with supports and expectations for how schools should engage families through evidence-based rubrics, for example. And so through this, we've seen increased investments in district-wide professional learning to support educators in building those skills and mindsets needed for that effective partnerships. We've also seen schools employ specific strategies around academic partnerships that I mentioned earlier to really deepen engagement, but specifically deepening engagement with families around learning and making sure that that partnership links back to, one, what their children are learning in the classroom, but also how parenting adults in any village that's loving on a child can support them outside of the school building. But I can't emphasize enough that success really occurs when family engagement is integrated into the school and district priorities rather than added to the already exhaustive list of things that educators are responsible for. And that's really where we see the greatest results.
Thank you so much. Well, let's kind of zoom in a little bit to some particular challenges, one of them being chronic absenteeism. We hear a lot about the struggles with that these days, with some improvement nationally perhaps, but would love to hear from you all about your experience with that as a challenge and what you've seen, what specific strategies you've seen work on the ground in your context. So Dr. Handley, why don't we start with your perspective on that?
Thank you. So I'm going to speak first probably from our principal lens, because that's where I sat the longest in my almost 30-year career, was as an elementary school principal. And so the first thing I would say is taking a differentiated approach. I know many districts have kind of what I would call that tier 1 approach. We send a message if the child is absent, follow up with that. So that's all great and fine. But the reality is that we recognize in education that a one-size opportunity doesn't fit all for learning with students, but yet we don't always make those shifts with families. So really digging deeply, something that we implemented when I was a principal was MTSS for families. And so really almost tiering our families based on the needs that they had and being able to take more of an individualized tiered intervention approach to families. And so one of the things that we learned was celebrating them along the way. I think so often, you know, what you reward is what you get more of. And what do schools often reward? Perfect attendance. That is great. Don't get me wrong. Neither of my girls ever had perfect attendance. So I think that's fabulous. And people who maintain that should be celebrated. But what about the child and the mom who missed 30 days last year and now they still miss 19, but wow, look at that improvement. So I would say stop waiting to be perfect before you're celebrating growth. The other thing I would say is just educating families about when it's important to keep students at home, because the reality is, particularly for international families, school looks different in other countries. Sometimes if you have an outdoor school and it rains, you don't go to school. Well, if I'm in America and I've not been educated on what the school system and the priorities and the norms are, I'm just going to assume and go with what I know. So I would say making sure that all of your families understand when it would be appropriate to keep a student home. You know, if it's cold outside and I'm coming from a warm climate, ooh, I'm not walking to the bus stop in this, I'm just going to stay home. Or when is sick, too sick? So really just equipping families with an understanding. I think we make assumptions that all families understand the school ease, but we don't provide them with the resources to level set with all of them. And then the other thing I would say is that also equipping families with resources for follow-up. So for example, in our district, after you have so many absences, there's a new House bill in our state to where they get referred to the county attorney's office. So the difference between an excused absence and an unexcused absence, let's face it, is a note, right? And so what we know is that typically more affluent or in the know families know to send a note or have the literacy to send a note. Well, what about our families who don't know how to do that or who have some barriers with sending a note? How are we equipping them with resources to be able to do that? So something that we did was we just had a kind of a pre-filled out note, blank Jill, I'd fill it in, was absent because she was sick. Period, right? Now that feels like a little bit of cheating, but the reality is that, let's face it, a lot of times when families send the note in, that's what they're saying anyways. So why not equip our families with resources that empower them to, I hate to say game the system, but unexcused absences can get families in a lot of trouble, right? And so what we shouldn't be doing is penalizing our families for a system that we don't tell them the rules about. So we also had those notes translated so that really removes some of those barriers for our non-native English speaking families as well. So I would just say educating families and making it more than about your child wasn't here. You know, one of the things we talk about is that if a child who's chronically tardy, let's say that they are below level in reading and their reading intervention takes place first part of the day, every single day. There's a big difference in a conversation that says, hey, Jill was absent yesterday, I need you to get her to school, to, hey, I know Jill was out yesterday. Is there a way that I can support you in getting to school? Because she's below level in reading, and the time that we're giving her extra reading support is the first part of the day. So when she's late, she misses that extra reading support every single day. So giving it context for families and just educating them on what I would say to be the U.S. school system ways.
Ayesha, how about you?
I think for me, and this is something that we've struggled with at Rocketship Discovery Prep as well, but I think, and this is something you all probably have heard before, but relationships with families typically set the stage for getting kids to school, which is why I really appreciated Miss McGraw's passion when she talked about just family engagement and how we make sure that our families are actually a part of the conversation, right? And I think that's what shifted a lot for us. So I'll give a concrete example. We were, our chronic absenteeism rate was at 40% last year, 2 years ago. And last year, we actually cut that in half. So we got it down to 20%. So that was a huge win for us. Still not great, still not perfect, but we found different ways to kind of make sure that we're steadily getting better. And relationships has been at the core of that. And another actionable thing that we have actually is care corps, which I know a lot of schools actually have because it is founded through the state of California community school grants. So it really helped us. It was actually an innovation after the pandemic where we actually brought in folks to actually provide resources for those families who have been chronically absent. Maybe it's that, and I know Dr. Handley just talked about some examples, right? Maybe it is that they're sick and the family doesn't have a way to get to school. Their car is broken down. Maybe they live too far. You know what I mean? It's so many different reasons that keep our families from being in school. And the point is to build a relationship to where you can actually hear those things and actually provide solutions. And Care Corps has actually done just that, which is why I think we were able to cut that chronic absenteeism rate in half. They call family, our Care Corps coordinator calls families every single day, along with someone dedicated on staff, whoever is absent. We call those families. It's not an automated system that they get hey, your child was absent today. No, it's actually a human being that calls a family and says, hey, what happened today? We missed Johnny today. What happened? Is there something we can help with? Just to make sure, one, we have a reason for the absence, but two, we can provide resources. So I think that's what's helped us overcome a lot of the barriers, removing those technological items and actually putting a human behind it, right? Building those relationships. And I think that is always going to be the way to go.
Just the Care Corps, is that a Rocketship term, or is that something broader than Rocketship?
From my understanding, I think it might be a little bit broader than Rocketship because it is funded by the state of California community schools grants. There are schools that do it. However, I don't know if they implement it in the way that we do at Rocketship. For us, we want to make sure that we're hitting chronic absenteeism, and they're a core way for us to do that.
Right. So let's get practical here in the last 20 minutes of our time together today. Ayesha and Dr. Handley, if you're to advise folks interested in getting started, whether they're here or just anywhere, where would you advise them to start to really think about how to integrate family engagement strategies into school? Dr. Handley, do you want to tackle that first, or Ayesha? You actually
let Ayesha go first. I know, yeah. Ayesha, you go ahead.
And I was just well, yeah. For us specifically, or for me rather, I would say invite families in, right? I think that if you need a core place to start, right, the foundation is to invite families in. So give them volunteer opportunities, right? Talk to them about our cafecito. We talk to them about our cafecitos, right? Maybe it could be another principle on this line, right? You start those monthly meetings with families where they get FaceTime with you, but offer it in Spanish. right? Like my core demographic, they speak Spanish, right? So although I don't speak Spanish, guess what? I have to have every single meeting, a translator, right? And I do it happily, right? Because I want to make sure that parents have the opportunity to engage, right? I want to invite them in. I want more families to attend, so I have to make it accessible to them. Parent organizing is like a huge pillar for Rocketship, not just Rocketship Discovery Prep, but it's something that we believe deeply. So our parents don't just like organize for renewals, right? And if you are a charter school principal here, then you know about renewals, right? Every 5 years, our schools actually have to go up for reauthorization, and that's we talk about that, but we don't want our families involved only every 5 years, right? We have to give them other opportunities and access to engagement, right? So they organize for crosswalks, right? We just got a crosswalk for one of our schools. We organize for mayoral forums, right? The mayor was just speaking at one of our schools, right? So the district council member for us actually meets with our families in our neighborhood, specifically for Rocketship Discovery Prep, every 2 weeks. He's here every 2 weeks, right? So we build out those opportunities for families to get involved and take action, right? And I think the more opportunities you give families, the more they can be involved. Specifically, I want to just talk really quickly about one of our family members. And this, I think, proves how deeply parent partnership runs for Rocketship Discovery Prep. Her name is Eva. Eva Heredia. And Eva is actually one of our founding members. This is now our 13th year. We're in our 13th year at Rocketship Discovery Prep. And Eva was actually a founding parent, and today I still talk to Eva. I was nowhere near Rocketship Discovery Prep 13 years ago, you know what I mean? But Eva has constantly stuck around, and she's helped me so much as a principal, right? Where she has the connections, right? And she has been a part of Rocketship Discovery Prep for so long. Her daughter is now in college, right? And this is an elementary school, but she shows up. She shows up every single time. And if I need anything, right, I'm like, hey, Eva, she works for the mayor's office. I was like, hey, Eva, I need the mayor to have this conversation with our schools about a crosswalk that we need for a certain school. Hey, Eva, we have a homeless encampment behind our school, and we're trying to figure out strategies to make sure that, our students stay safe, but the homeless get what they need as well, and she's there, right? She's there to be a thought partner. She's there to rally other parents. She's there to bring in the resources and advocate, right? So I think finding those people that are a part of the community that can be an Eva, right, and advocate and give you the things that you need to boost your school community, I think is like critical, right? So I would say start there. Find your core members, invite families in, and ensure that families have access.
I would say echoing ditto everything that Ayesha said is so true. And I'm going to kind of build on that piece about build your team, because the reality is that we know how critical family engagement is. However, it's never, in few places is it a critical pillar showing up. And the reason I know that is because typically people will spend money on what they feel is important. And so I'll circle back around to what Cassandra said. And Cassandra, though, in fact, I wrote down the way you said that. I love that, to where it's not an additional expense, it's a necessary investment. But family engagement beyond that beginning of the year phone call home, that gets tough. Teachers believe in family engagement, but they've got so many things on their plate as well. So what I would say is, I think where you start in anything is, where are we, is the reality of a self-assessment. Where are we starting? And not trying to take that on yourself, whether you're the principal or you're the lead or you're the district person. No one person can do this work by themselves. So a team approach. But so I would say a first step is developing a team if you don't already have one. And determine, with that team, and Ayesha said this earlier, like with your team, let's start to think about, what do we believe about family engagement? Because the reality is if you're the building leader and you believe one thing and your staff believes another, we have to get on the same page first. Before we can start to do some outreach and get families engaged, we have to all be on the same page about what we believe about families and family engagement first. So develop a team. The other thing I would say is, once you get your team together, before you know where you're going, you have to know where you're starting. And so some type of self-assessment, and we know that there are lots of self-assessment lessons out there. One of my favorite books is Dr. Stephen Constantino, Engage Every Family. That really spearheaded a lot of the work as a principal that I started doing, and really the way I was thinking about family engagement started shifting after I heard him at a conference, bought his book and all the things. And then the other thing is that I mentioned is in the state of Kentucky, there's something called Family Friendly Certification. And it's more than just a cute little title and like a stamp. It's a rigorous process that's really grounded. And I'll drop that self-assessment in the chat in a moment, but that was really a game changer for our school. We felt really good about, like, we felt like we had good relationships with our families. We felt like our families loved us, and they did. But the reality is that self-assessment allowed us to humble ourselves and look deeply at our practices to make sure that we were engaging all families. And what we found out was that as great as we thought we weren't engaging all of our families. We were engaging, so 38% of my population were white. Guess whose voice I was getting about 90% of the time? My white families. Until I dug deeply into that, I was making all these decisions, yes, on family voice, but it was based on white family voice. So really understanding and digging deeply and leaning into your families, know where you're starting before you know where you need to go. And so, again, thinking about what do you believe, how are you currently engaging with your families? And then the thing that I will probably hang my hat on, because this came through my research, was are you always expecting families to conform? Because the reality is that so many of today's family engagement structures and practices are still very traditional and Eurocentric. Yet the demographics of our nation is not so traditional and Eurocentric. So how are we shifting our systems and structures to meet families where they are literally? How are we honoring the cultural wealth that our families are bringing to us? Or are we always expecting them to learn our game? And so those would be just the things that I would say. Develop your team and do a self-assessment to figure out where's your starting point and start to build an understanding of what do we believe about family engagement. Because if you don't, so often we jump right into the activities, and then those turn into what I always like to call like a pop-up activity, like, oh, a literacy night. Literacy nights are good. Please, they are good. But sometimes it's like, oh, we did literacy night. Woo, we did family engagement. We've got it. It's like Cassandra said, this isn't a checkbox. It's not something as, whoop, did that. Yep, we've got family engagement. Family engagement means that families are partnering with you as true partners, as true co-creators. And so how do you develop systems to get that? And that's not a 1 year thing. That's not a 2 year thing. Like you have to be in it for the long game as it relates to that, and make it the pillar of all the things that you do and not just a side hustle, if you will.
Well, I want to make sure that we get to some of the questions that look like they're popping up. We have a couple more things that we could touch on, but maybe we can pivot over to questions. Titilayo, I see a couple in the Q&A, but I don't know if there's others that have popped up.
Yeah, there are a couple of them in the Q&A. I appreciated you all's robust discussion of like what your activities look like at the top. There was a question about funding, and I know that Principal Doster, you touched on the state funding through community schools. There's a question about how you all access funding for these efforts. A lot of the things you mentioned seem to be, well, nothing's ever free and cost neutral, but a lot of the things seem to be like lighter lifts within what you were already doing. So that was encouraging to hear. But to the extent that you're accessing funding for some of these activities, there's a question about how you do that, and wondered if anyone wanted to jump in with thoughts about that.
I'll jump in. So I would say that, and because I'm going to say this, is that sadly enough, as much as importance is put on family and importance, I say in air quotes, I always say let the funding follow. The first thing funding often follows curricular because there are standards that are based on. Not every state even has necessarily family engagement standards. Kentucky was the first state to do that. But where do they show up? That's great to have standards, but how are we holding people accountable? When we look at how schools are measured as a good school, what's it based on? Standardized test scores, right? What if you have a highly family engaged? Yes, the research supports that you should have high achievement as well, but sometimes engagement doesn't mean working with homework. Engagement means, are you creating a routine for your child? Family engagement means we're honoring and valuing what you bring to the table, because I recognize you have to work 3 jobs. And thank you for doing that so that your child can have clothes on their back. So I would say when it comes to funding, it's about making some tough decisions. I'll give you an example of when I was the principal. We have a position that's a classified position that's called a family resource coordinator position. And the role of that position is really to move some non-academic barriers. So you need help with your gas and electricity, we got you. You need diapers, we got you. Those types of things. And so while that was one of the things that we were noticing, the other piece we were noticing is that while that position was critical, we also needed someone who kind of understood leading the work through the lens of an educator, right? Through the lens of a teacher and the principal and the school piece of it, because that role was really more through a social work lens, which is critical. But if we're trying to merge the two together, the reality is that there's no one just sitting around saying, oh, give me some more work. Oh, no one's doing family engagement. It's going to be me. Everybody's got a little piece of it. And while everyone should have a little piece of it, when something's a priority, it should be somebody's primary job. And so something that we did was, we weren't getting any extra funding. I always tell everybody there was no money tree in the backyard of our school. We had for years, it was like year 13 for me as a principal. We had for 13 years funded a reading interventionist, which was important because we had kids with reading gaps. And then one year it came about in this conversation about like, we need to better engage our families. And I was like, well, if we're going to get real with it, we've got to put our money where our mouth is. And so we made a real courageous decision to eliminate the reading interventionist position. Not that we didn't need that, but we just felt like we needed someone who focused 100% of their efforts on family engagement. And so we funded a position, a family ambassador position. Note to self, this is a small semantics thing, but the first year it was parent liaison. The very next year we shifted to family ambassador. Why? Parent is too narrow, so we switched to family. 2, liaison is oftentimes associated with court, and that gives a real icky feeling. And with a large international population, ambassador is usually a very friendly, I'm on your side kind of a term. And so words matter. So I would say is that, you know, making those tough decisions and looking at data to understand what's our need and what are we trying to accomplish, and then going from there. And then the other thing I will just, you know, I'll give a plug also for NCFL. We were, during our time, when we were certifying as a family-friendly school, we partnered, our school was partnered with one of the schools in Jefferson County with NCFL. And so really having that outside agency, someone who, because when you're immersed in your work, sometimes you can get blinders on. So having an outside partner to help you think through and see what's working well, and just maybe some small shifts that you can make is also a real piece. And then sometimes they can help find funding as well. Like they were like, hey, did you know about this grant? No, I didn't know about that. Thank you for that. So, and then really realizing that not everything takes money, right? It doesn't take money to build relationships with family. I know Ayesha, Cassandra both talked about that. It doesn't take additional money to do a lot of the things to build trust with families, inviting them in, hearing their voice. So recognizing that some things we need to shift funding, but it's not always about money.
Dr. Handley, you took the words right out of my mouth. There are usually so many different community-based organizations and national orgs that have the same priorities, and it's really easy to hyper-focus on our students and families, but we're all moving through in the same direction, and oftentimes we're duplicating services. And so where you see there is a statewide family engagement center in your state, for example, or someone who secured a preschool development grant, it's really important to see where folks are doing the work and how you might partner with them and build coalitions, because this work is only going to sustain if we are working together. And so as funding becomes more and more limited and we're all trying to figure out how to, you know, sustain this work, the answer is really going to come through building community and partnerships and remembering that we're really all in this together.
I was over here, I don't know if y'all saw me, but I was over here jumping for joy. As both Ms. McGraw and Dr. Handley were talking, because it's true, like not everything requires money. A lot of the things that we presented today actually doesn't cost money at all or are funded by grants. So like the state provides it. I think in addition to that, right, and I think about like how we sustain this work, I just heard Ms. McGraw say talk a lot about like partnership, community partnership, right? And that comes from our families too. Our families are a part of our community. We don't always have to look outside. We could look right inside for the things that we need. And for us at Rocketship Discovery Prep, our parents are actually required to have parent partnership hours, right? At least 20 parent partnership hours where they get it through donating snacks, right, for our kids. They get it through participating in events. They get it for, literally, I have a family, like we had an event here and I had a family who donated a jumper, a bounce house, right, to the event, multiple bounce houses to the event, right, where we didn't have to come out of pocket at all as a school, right? So it's not only about like how we sustain this work of like family engagement, but how do we sustain just the day-to-day needs of our school as well? And we do that through parent partnership, right? And our parents love to do it. They're excited to do it. Not all of them can, but those that can do. And it's really helped our community and served our community well.
And maybe I'll combine the last two questions we have because we only have about 5 minutes left. One question is about how you all measure parent engagement. And the last question is about how I think it was Principal Doster who said families are the first teachers. Someone just +1 that and said, yes, this is Alejandra's question. How are you all thinking about enabling parent support instruction at home? So teachers get curriculum and coaching. How are you all supporting parents on the instructional side? So just wondered if anyone wanted to weigh in on either of those questions. What does support for parents at home look like? And how do you all think about measuring parent engagement?
So I'll speak on a little bit of the measuring, because I think when we're really looking to evaluate family engagement strategies, specifically at the school level, it's really important to start simple. We usually don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's usually some kind of data management system or tool already in place to just track communication. And so oftentimes those systems from the district and even at charter networks have a way for you to disaggregate the communication across various things such as race, gender, attendance level, behavioral data, all of those things that you're kind of already tracking, but you just have a different lens when you're looking at that data, right? So instead of saying these parents usually don't answer the phone, I might say, okay, I see that we have the lowest engagement from this group. Why is that? What strategies are we doing? What have we not done already as a school system to think about supporting this family? What types of strategies can we use to really build trust and relationships and begin to track that? Another thing that I would do is really think about as you're building out the family engagement team that Dr. Handley mentioned before, try to get representation from across grade level bands, such as your grade level chairs. And so as they are moving through, for example, their weekly team meetings, they're thinking about academic targets through the lens of family engagement. So that way you can start to see where you are correlating the engagement that you're making with families with the academic outcomes of students. And just thinking about it in that way, again, it goes back to how am I integrating family engagement strategies and what we're already doing. And if everybody is looking at the work through the lens of family engagement, it becomes really easy to monitor.
Well, we are just out of time and before we start losing folks, needing to transition to the next call. Really want to thank you all for being part of this great conversation, both our panelists today, Ayesha, Dr. Handley, and Cassandra, and our active folks in the chat. This was wonderful. So don't forget, there's going to be a little survey that pops up, and you can indicate what you thought of today, what you want more of, and if you're interested in more technical assistance. But we really thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great to be here.